When the Delicious in Dungeon anime came out, my friend recommended that I check it out. At first I thought it was just okay, but after each episode I started liking it more and more, until I realized that the show was basically made for me. After finishing the first season, one thing stuck with me. I kept wondering, what's the deal with Kuro? Why are Delicious and Dungeon Kobolds so cool? You see, my knowledge of kobolds has been very weird. I hate to say this, but I believe the first time I saw something be referred to as a kobold was in Your Realms Live. If you don't know what Your Realms Live is, well, good. But anyway, at first I thought, oh, kobolds are furry rock people, okay. Then I thought, oh, they're furry rock people, got it. But wait, they're actually German goblin spirit guys. Or they're rodent people with candles. Or lizard people. Why are they usually dog or lizard people anyway? After properly looking into it, from how I understand it, they started as creatures from German folklore. Then Dungeons & Dragons made them into lizard people with some dog-like features. Meanwhile, pieces of media popular in Japan took inspiration from D&D but made them fully into dog people, while D&D leaned fully into the lizardy, draconic direction over time. I've seen most people either credit Wizardry or Record of Lodoss War with popularizing canine kobolds. There's definitely a bunch more you could say on this topic, and a lot of different series have their own unique depictions of kobolds. But essentially, generally speaking, with kobolds, Westerners are more often scalies and Easterners are more often furries. So it makes sense that DC20 kobolds are going to be draconic. Draconic kobolds are cool too, I get it, but I have a soft spot for the canine kobolds. I think Kuro is really cool, I've been wanting to make some DC20 homebrew, and I love the DC20 Ancestry system. So I decided to try making a homebrew Canine Kobold Ancestry for DC20. Originally I hesitated to work on it, since I realized the Beastborn probably has at least half the traits I'd want a canine kobold to have anyway. And maybe when Gremlin releases I could take some traits from them too, but then I realized they can say pretty much the same thing about Draconic Kobolds. A half Beastborn, half Dragonborn has like 80% of the traits I'd want a Draconic Kobold to have. So I went for it, and here's what I made. These are their ancestry traits. I'm going to read each of them out loud, and I'll talk about my design process and elaborate on some of the traits individually. Pack motivation. Once per turn, in combat, while within 5 spaces of an ally, you can spend 1 AP to grant yourself a D8 help die to add to an attack, skill, or trade check you make before the end of your turn. Desperate Whimper. Once per combat, when you enter Death's Door, you can let out a Desperate Whimper, granting an ally of your choice within 10 spaces that can hear you a D8 help die for free, which they can add to one check of their choice they make before the end of their next turn. Tracking Prowess. You have advantage on survival checks made to track a creature or group of creatures. Additionally, you have advantage on awareness checks made to find creatures that are actively tracking. Dark Vision is an official DC20 Ancestry trait which canine kobolds have access to. Flexible Diet. You are immune to negative effects that come as a result of consuming raw, spoiled, and dirty food or liquids. Leading by example. Once per combat, when you take the help action on your turn to aid a creature, you can also grant yourself a D8 help die for free that lasts until the end of your turn. Your help die can only be used on the same type of check they are aiding with. Knowledgeable Tracker. While tracking a creature or group of creatures, you also learn their exact number and their creature types. Additionally, after you begin tracking, you can take the Analyze Creature action on each of the creatures without needing to see or hear them. Each creature can only have the Analyze Creature action used on them by you in this way once, even if you track them again in the future. Locking Bite. You can use your teeth to grapple. When using your teeth, creatures take 1 piercing damage when you successfully grapple them, and each time they fail in an attempt to free themselves from your grapple. You can't speak while using your teeth to grapple. Additionally, you can spend 1 AP to attempt to grapple creatures that are 2 or more sizes larger than you in a unique way by latching onto them with your teeth. Make an athletics check with disadvantage, contested by the opposing creature's martial check. Success. The creature is grappled by you, while grappling them. Their speed and agility saves are unaffected. Instead, your speed becomes 0 and you have disadvantage on agility saves. They're taunted by you, and when they hit you with an attack that targets your PD, they share the damage with you. Each take half. You can't perform grapple maneuvers on them. When they move, you move with them. If an effect attempts to forcibly move the creature you're grappling beyond your reach, or if they begin falling, instead of resisting, you can freely choose to move with them. They can spend 1 AP to attempt to free themselves from this grapple. You must make an athletics check contested by the creature's martial check, which they roll with disadvantage. Failure. The grapple immediately ends. Burrow Speed, Keen Sense, and Toxic Fortitude are official DC20 Ancestry traits which canine kobolds have access to. Uncommon Manner of Speaking. The first time you begin speaking to a creature or group of creatures in a language that they can understand, if they're unfamiliar with your manner of speaking, you must make a language check to determine if they can understand you. If you would already have to make a language check due to having limited language mastery, you instead make a singular language check with disadvantage. Whatever the result, in future conversations, the creatures that heard you speak will be able to understand you as normal, due to becoming familiar with your manner of speaking. Sonic Weakness. You have Sonic Vulnerability 1. And those were the traits. Hopefully you liked what I came up with. Now for my design process. If you only wanted to see the traits that I made, that's fine. This is more of an epilogue now. So, I wanted to make sure the Canine Kobold fantasy was properly represented. So I looked into Delicious in Dungeon, Wizardry, Monster, Suikoden, Record of Lodos War, Monster Musume, and a few other random series. Although for most of these, my research didn't go much deeper than reading a wiki page or watching a YouTube video. And not every series ended up inspiring me, but if there was a common trait shared between the kobolds of multiple different series, then I took note of that. However, most common Canine Kobold traits in media are pretty much just features that you'd expect a dog to have, but exaggerated a bit. So for the most part, I ended up either making unique traits which I felt were fitting, or taking inspiration from Delicious in Dungeon, since that's what inspired me to make this homebrew in the first place. When thinking of ideas for unique traits, I knew I wanted some of them to be connected to Help Die, and I had two reasons for this. The first reason is that I remembered what the dungeon coach said about the official DC20 kobolds. He's mentioned before how they're gonna have some traits relating to Help Die, and if official DC20 Draconic kobolds are gonna have some Help Die related traits, I felt like my homebrew Canine Kobold should have some too. I like there being some type of connection between these kobold types. And I want to be clear that I'm not just making a dog person ancestry. I'm specifically making a Canine Kobold ancestry, and I think connecting them through Help Die helps with that. The second reason is that it felt thematically appropriate. The reason DC20 kobolds are going to have Help Die related traits is due to how Draconic kobolds are known for helping and serving their dragon masters, and Canine kobolds are also known for serving their masters in a sense too. It of course depends on the series, but in Delicious in Dungeon, Kuro has McBell as his boss. I believe in Delicious in Dungeon and Record of Lodos War, some kobolds are slaves. In a bunch of different series, Canine kobolds kind of serve each other, plus there is just the dog aspect of it, with how dogs serve masters in real life. Although the direction I took was mostly just focused on your desire to do better for your allies, or their desire to help you, but you can flavor it however you want of course. Now I'm going to talk about some ancestry traits individually. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about traits that I expect people will have questions about, but if something still confuses you, or if you're curious why I designed something a certain way, what my inspiration was, why I included certain ancestry traits, or anything else, feel free to ask. For pack motivation, I knew I wanted a trait similar to pack tactics. I didn't want to directly copy pack tactics, since that felt boring, so I spent a few days thinking about alternatives. Then, I got a bad cold. But, during my sickness I was suddenly struck with inspiration. I thought about how in DC20 combat, you can spend action points to grant yourself advantage, and I thought it'd be cool if there was a feature where you could instead grant yourself a D8 help die to add to your roll, since adding a D8 to your roll is mathematically superior to advantage. Then it all started to fall into place. Early versions of this trait acted as a rule substitute type of thing, where it said that instead of granting yourself advantage, you could grant yourself a help die, but that wording ended up being confusing, so I ended up rewording it into the current iteration. The flavor that I imagined for this trait is that it represents your desire to do better for people you care about. Your ally isn't directly helping you, but their presence is inspiring you, so when you push yourself you can perform beyond your best. Now for Knowledgeable Tracker. You might have noticed this already, but the beginning of it is taken from the Natural Hunter Expert Tracker feature. The reason for this is because I tried to use similar wording to official DC20 features whenever possible, and the Start of Expert Tracker was exactly what I wanted. Originally, I didn't plan on Knowledgeable Tracker telling you the exact number of creatures, since I was trying to avoid overlap with Expert Tracker, but then I realized you learn it regardless, like, hey GM, I'd like to use Knowledgeable Tracker, and then they're like, alright, they're all humanoids, make 4 history checks. And then it's like, 4 checks, I wonder what that could imply. The flavor is pretty straightforward. It's just that you're a knowledgeable tracker, so you can deduce or recall things about creatures you're tracking without needing to physically see or hear them. I really like this trait and I think it fits well with Canine Kobolds. Now, Locking Bite. I could easily spend 15 minutes just talking about it. It went through an absurd amount of iterations. It was by far the hardest trait to design. The reason I wanted a teeth grappling trait in the first place was because of a scene in Delicious in Dungeon, where Kuro latches onto a huge creature using his teeth. I thought something like this would make for a cool trait, and I like the idea of having some way of dealing damage with your teeth, since biting seems to be pretty common for Canine Kobolds. However, I didn't want to give them natural weapons, since if I did that, I'd either end up copying and pasting a bunch of natural weapon traits from Beastborn, which I didn't want to do, or I'd end up making my own unique natural weapon trait. And if I did that, I absolutely would have power crept the Beastborn natural weapon trait, which I also didn't want to do. So I felt like having biting through a trait unrelated to natural weapons was really the best option if I was going to include the biting trait. For how it works, I think the first part of Locking Bite should be easy to understand. It lets you use your mouth to grapple and you can deal a little damage, vaguely like a weaker hazardous hide, with the damage aspect of it. For the second part of Locking Bite, I'd also like to think that should be easy to understand, at least mechanically. It's a bit wordy, but I'd hope they aren't confused by what it does. Though I will say, I don't think DC20 has rules for ending a grapple if you're the grappler, but I think it's intended that you can end your grapple at any time for free. That's the assumption I went with. If that isn't how it works, then it is how it works for this trait, I guess. Whenever you want to unlatch from a creature, you can. But I think the flavor is the main thing that could confuse people, so I'll quickly run through it. The reason you have disadvantage when latching onto them, and they have disadvantage when trying to escape, is due to it being hard to grip onto them, but once you're latched on, you're really latched on, and it's hard to remove you. Their speed and agility saves are unaffected, but yours are, and you can't perform grapple maneuvers on them. This is due to how much bigger they are than you. You're kinda just along for the ride. The reason they're taunted by you is because you're latched onto them. It's like in real life, when you're being attacked by a scurry of squirrels, you're gonna feel the need to prioritize the one currently latched onto you. The reason they take some of the damage when they attack you is due to them accidentally partially hitting themselves. It's like in real life when you punch the squirrel that's latched onto you, and you accidentally hurt yourself. Logically, there are ways of attacking something latched onto you without accidentally hurting yourself, but I'd say that's represented by them first breaking the grapple. Now on to uncommon manner of speaking, which might be the most confusing trait that I made. If I had to simplify it, it's more or less just saying that the first time you speak to someone in a language that you're fluent in, you treat it as if you had limited language mastery. And if you actually have limited language mastery, then you roll with disadvantage. The actual wording is a bit vague, but I do have a reason for that. First of all, the flavor is supposed to be that you talk in a way that some people have difficulty understanding. I used vague wording since I didn't want to dictate how people roleplay this. I'd probably roleplay it as them speaking in a simplistic way, but it could be roleplayed as them having an accent, or maybe they add the word kobold into their sentences randomly and it confuses people. Maybe they talk like Scooby-Doo. Maybe it's a weird situation like Groot where most people can't understand them at first. Or you can treat it as being more mechanical and not roleplay through how you speak. It's supposed to be a thing that you work with your GM to decide. If this was an official trait, there would absolutely be a DC tip below it explaining this. And second of all, I didn't want to add a cooldown or codify what future conversations means. I used vague wording since language checks in DC20, at least currently, don't have rules for how often you're supposed to make them or when you can repeat them. It's up to the GM, and I didn't want uncommon manner of speaking to be different, and have rules that specifically say that if you fail, the person can't understand you for X amount of hours or something. However, I asked one of my friends for feedback. Not the friend that recommended Delicious in Dungeon, but a different friend. I have at least two. But anyway, he really felt that there should be a specified cooldown, and that if a language check fails, then they shouldn't become familiar with your manner of speaking in future conversations. And instead, the check should be repeated until successful. Logically, I think my friend is right, but I also completely disagree. I already said why I didn't want a cooldown, and I think having it so the check needs to be repeated on failure will just lead to unnecessary bookkeeping. However, I respect my friend. He's not familiar with DC20 specifically, but he's very familiar with other TTRPGs, and if he disagrees with me, then that's fair. So I made an alternative version based on how he thinks the trait should work. So you can use this instead if you prefer. Sonic vulnerability is due to them having sensitive hearing. And that was the video. Hopefully you liked the homebrew. I had a lot of fun making it. I definitely plan on making some more homebrew in the future, although I'm not sure when. It'll probably either be in a few months or like a year, depending on how many people want to make more stuff like this. But regardless, I plan on eventually making more DC20 homebrew. Also, if this Kobold homebrew ends up becoming outdated, I'll probably at some point make a sequel video where I fix any mistakes, update it, and maybe add a few more traits. I do have a few scrapped ideas I wouldn't mind looking into again, like an object smelling trait, loyalty trait, mouth catching trait, emotional support trait, a bunch of different ideas I end up scrapping for various reasons, but there might be some concepts worth revisiting eventually. But anyway, that's it.